One of the struggles in making, regardless of what it is that you make, is the tendency to compare ourselves to the artists who inspire us. But what do you do when the work you produce isn't even close to the work of your creative heroes? Well, some give up, while others see slight missteps and outright failures as necessary components in the creative process. Disappointment with what we make can be creative fuel, and being creatively off balance can lead us to new ideas and directions that we never could have planned. Our appreciation of the work we do in the wake is often directly proportional to the effort we put into it. I'm Jeffrey Sidoris, I'm talking to John Wilkening, and this is In Between. Yeah, much better. Much better.
Yeah.
So wait, where we do this a lot. We talk about stuff and go, we should have been recording.
Yeah, it was nice. This is the first time you've actually let go. Hey, stop that thought.
Yeah, hold on.
Yeah.
And now I don't remember where it was at. Something like, what was it?
So you were talking about music and
right.
sort of your inspiration,
right?
And how through sort of the, I don't know how to put the label on, but like alternative music, you discovered and sort of fell in love with like the work of David Carson. And you made a comment about how you're incapable of designing that way.
Oh yeah.
That every time you tried, it's been terrible.
Still try in the present. Yeah.
So I asked if the reason you think it's terrible is that you judge your beginning work on the work that Carson and everyone has put out, and that in that process you don't allow yourself to grow to the point of Carson. And the quote that really sort of jumps to mind when I that drove this question is, I forget who said it, but it was, don't judge your beginning by someone else's middle.
Oh man, that's a great quote.
Because like I look at you and I see someone who's been able to figure out pretty much anything they get their hands on. You know, you look at your career and you've had so many twists and turns, and you've become far more proficient at each one of those endeavors than you'd probably give yourself credit for. But what I see anytime you do anything that sort of gets close to like Carson,
mm-hmm.
is that you go, it's not David Carson. And it's like one of those where you're like, your love of Carson's work is so deep that you just look at your work and go, that's garbage.
Right. Well, and I think it happens with a lot of those guys. A lot of those guys that I was introduced to at that time, Chris Bigg, Vaughn Oliver, David Carson, of course, the different publications that they were a part of, Attic Design, that was another kind of design firm that was really pushing the edge and doing really sort of out there stuff. And it's almost like listening to, like there's some of John Coltrane, for example, that I can listen to and go, oh man, this is the pinnacle, right? I get this. Or Miles Davis, I get this. Or Dizzy Gillespie, I get this. But then there's other stuff by those artists where, because they were stretching and pushing and pulling in different directions, and their understanding of that is so far above me, I just feel lost. I feel like I can't even process what I'm listening to. And I feel that way about certain types of design, where I can appreciate it from the standpoint of the effort that goes into it. And I can even maybe even sometimes see where that came from, like what sort of twists and turns and influences had to be present for you to get there. But in trying to get there myself, I feel like I fail miserably.
Okay. I can sort of see that. Do you think, so this sort of analysis coming from very much a non-designer,
mm-hmm.
but when I see someone like the Carson and those guys,
mm-hmm.
that is the jazz of design work, where they're
I think
taking
so, yeah.
they're taking It's like the rules aren't obvious. They're taking things that shouldn't work but somehow work together
Right.
in this free-flowing, loosely held design.
Yes.
And in reality, that type of work is so much more difficult because you have to understand the rules at such an intrinsic level that you know how to basically violate all the rules and the sum total of it work.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Or not be
Whereas,
aware of the rules at all. Not be aware of
yeah,
what you should or shouldn't be doing. That's the other side of that.
yeah. But like, I would almost argue that you can't, like, if I tried to do that design work with no knowledge of it, most of that would be garbage because me not knowing the rules, I then create work that just violates the intrinsic art, like things in such a way that when you look at it, you're like, that doesn't work.
Right. But don't you get that on some level with your photography? I mean, you broke some of the rules of photography with your pinhole work and established yourself as kind of one of the guys doing that kind of work.
Yeah, but like, I knew those rules. I know the rules. In the world of photography, I know what you should be doing. I know the rules of thirds. I know sharpness. I know like all those things, so that when I purposely go about my work, I'm purposely violating the rules that I know to be in place. But then what I'm doing is I'm in essence, through experimentations, figuring out another rule set.
Right.
That works, so that when you look at it and you go, it's not sharp, it's not like all these things that more traditional photography works on, I'm like, well, I'm not playing by those rules. I'm playing by this rules. I'm playing by using contrast and using this, using that, figuring out the things that would elevate the work from just pure like blur happenstance.
Yeah, you're playing by more
that.
of the rules of a painter than a photographer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when I look at Carson's work, there's something going on to where you look at it and go, that is a visually pleasing image and not just a mess of experimentation.
Yes.
And to me, that type of work, that type of understanding of those rules only comes through experimentation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, and I look at that work, especially some of the new collage work that he's been doing. I look at that final work, and it blows me away. But part of the reason that it blows me away is I can't see how he got there.
Exactly.
I don't see, oh, if you would just go step, 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 this is what you end up with. My design thought process currently doesn't work that way.
Yeah. But like, the only way to get to that point is to just create work. But I think the hang up is it's hard to, I've learned in relationships not to use you statements, but here you go.
No, go ahead, hit me. You make it work.
but you in your work are often a perfectionist, and that's why you produce such good work, is that you go, hey, this podcast that 95% of people would listen to and go, the sound quality is perfect. You go, I hear something bouncing off my closet door.
Right. And get frustrated because there's nothing I can do about it at the moment.
Yeah. And so like, when you create the work, like Carson-esque work, you feel lost because you don't know the rules. You judge your work because it's not the level of the work that you admire, and you don't see the way to get to that point.
Or I also don't see a way to make it my own because I've put some imaginary target of what it should be out in front of it.
Yeah, but I would counter argue that you will always make the work your own if you just do enough of it. Because you can't produce work for any length of time that's just a pure rip-off copy of somebody.
Right.
Knowing you.
I think you're right, and I think we're already seeing. I'm already seeing the work change this year over last year, because for the last few years, I didn't produce a lot. And I've already
Mm-hmm.
produced, 4 times the number of pieces this year so far that I did all of last year, closing in on 5 times. And with each new piece, I'm seeing differences. Maybe other people wouldn't see them as readily, but I'm seeing differences in how tight they are, and conceptually where I'm trying to go with them.
Yeah. Granted, this opinion's coming from a non-painter, but to me, the work that you create and the you have to work through your ideas on canvas.
Yeah.
I would argue that you couldn't sit at a notebook and iterate on a notebook your way to a great painting. The only way to do
or
that
even
would
a
be
halfway decent one in my case.
yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's why there are typically, 2 or 3 or 4 underpaintings, because I am working it out. I'm working it out on the substrate,
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out where it's going to go, and trying to be present with the materials enough to let it go where it needs to go, without sort of, clamping down the what I think to be true about something we keep coming back to, the rules, whatever that means.
Yeah. And what's funny is that when I look at your paintings, I see a lot of the ideas behind the David Carson work in your paintings, and not so much in the direct, design work ripoff.
Yeah.
But you are layering things on top of each other. They're dirty, they're messy. They're the painting equivalent of some of his design work.
Yeah. Thank you.
Or at least a thought thread.
I wonder if we all, at some point, or maybe even several points along that sort of continuum, do we look at our own work, and it's not that we're dissatisfied with it, but we go, would it be more interesting if ...
I would argue that dissatisfaction is vital in your evolution as an artist.
Yeah.
Because you don't change if you're satisfied with your work. You don't evolve, you don't push yourself beyond what you're currently doing if you're 100% satisfied with your work.
Right. Right.
And
then I should be changing like crazy, because I am so dissatisfied most of the time. I'm an evolutionary machine, mister.
but I think that change in that evolution has to come through the doing rather than just the dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people get hung up, is that they get so wrapped up in, or not even wrapped up, but they get so afraid of producing bad work that once you get to the point in your sort of artistic endeavor where you're producing good work and people are recognizing you for producing good work, to then knowingly step out and produce subpar work is a hard mental state to do.
Sure.
It's something that I've had to wrestle, because I've gotten known for that impressionist street work that I've done.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at my Instagram account, you have to scroll a ways to actually hit it.
Right. Why is that?
Because I wanted to do. I want the ability to tell more stories than what impressionist street photography gives me.
So it's a limitation, and in that case, it's a limitation of the medium.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And so a lot of what you see right now is live in the outskirts of Philadelphia in a small, like a suburb town, and I basically want to produce work in this. There's a body of work in this town, photographing the town, because it's so small. It's small enough that it's real easy to hit the obvious photographs.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to push myself beyond just the obvious to then really push myself to really tell the story of this town through multiple years, and like and build one of those bodies of works on this very specific thing. But what I've felt is that a lot of those pictures have been, like, in terms of skill level, subpar comparing to my other work, or my audience just is like, well, that's not what you do,
Right.
whatever
But
the reason.
okay, how do you sort of quantify them as subpar when they're so completely different from that previous work? How do you make a value judgment? Like, what are you basing the quality on if it's so different?
This is sort of back to how you view your work versus Carson. There's a lot of my work around Ambler has been influenced by a couple of photographers, and I'm judging my work specifically against those photographers.
Mm-hmm.
I love I think I gave you his book, Quasi Boyd Bolton.
Oh, yeah.
He's a photographer out of LA.
Yeah.
He shoots LA in sort of this, he calls it American landscapes, and it's like, the way I described it when I interviewed him for my podcast a while back was that he's what I would describe as a landscape photographer who shoots in the city.
Mm-hmm.
And he's basically photographing a changing Los Angeles,
Right.
Standpoints. And, you know, his style has been hugely influential. Nate Matos up in Portland, Oregon, hugely influential. Like, there's these guys that, Caleb Jenkins, like, there's these guys that, like, have this style that's so different than what I shoot, that it took me a while to sort of get it.
Do
and
you
now
see
that
it coming through in your own work yet?
Slowly.
Yeah.
There's it's one of those where, like, I'll get a roll of film back and there'll be like there's a frame that sort of defines what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, okay, that's where I'm moving closer to that. I'm sort of building that,
Is it encouraging that you see it a little bit at a time, or is it frustrating that you don't see it enough?
Both.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think creative work thrives on having that, like, that rock to grind it against, that hard thing to push against. I completely reject the notion that creative work needs, like, depression and, like, alcohol and sort of those bad negative things. But I agree that you need a creative obstacle to like push against,
right,
to really get the work that you want.
Yeah. You are a big proponent of being almost in a constant state of being off balance creatively in order for new good work to emerge.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
It's like the worst creative project you can gives a creative is go, hey, do anything.
Oh, I can't stand that. I can't stand that.
And take this all the way back to the start of this conversation. I think for you, painting sort of in that style of Carson, it feels a little like being pushed out without the constraint of the rules. That you talk about, you have no idea where to push the work,
mm-hmm.
other than pure copying right now.
Right.
But I think if you created artificial rules and then basically just produced work, even if it was garbage in your eyes, that what would happen is you would find your footing and an idea and a creative thread that you could pull on, that, a year later from now, you're look at your work and go, not only is that something, it's my something.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's what I'm either hopefully consciously, but either consciously or subconsciously trying to do with the new work, while still holding on to some of the narrative qualities of some of the previous work. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it makes sense considering, we've talked a lot that, you light up when it comes to stories.
Yeah.
Like, it's something that you could probably sum up what you do in totality as you're a storyteller.
Yeah, but that's one of those words like authentic, right? That gets thrown around. I mean, I like that, and thanks, but some of the people that I really find myself drawn to think in such a different way, or seem to think in such a different way, and maybe that's the rub. Maybe they're not thinking in a different way at all. It's in the execution. Maybe we're trying to get to the same place thematically or narratively. They're just pulling from a different toolbox.
Yeah. No, I could totally see that. And I think that's the beauty of anytime you try to produce work very similar to other artists, is that I would argue that you can't do that for very long without starting to pull from your own experiences and toolboxes.
Right.
The work I create was very much a reaction to Ernst Haas's work. And we've talked about this on I think Process Driven.
Yep.
Where I looked at his work and I said, I want to create that, but I want to create it with a very different tool. And that singular decision of the tool to use changed entirely how the work came out.
Yeah. Has it been intentional, or do you allow the unintentional to creep in? I mean, I think that's part of what I'm wrestling with is do I keep trying to shoehorn this work into some sort of aesthetic, or do I just keep my hands in motion and let it go where it wants to go? And that seems to be the push and pull every time I'm working through a new piece of work.
Yeah, I to be honest, I don't really know what's the right answer to that question.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a beauty to trying to shoehorn and force something into a creative endeavor.
Right.
Because you'll learn real quickly whether it can or can't do that.
And have.
Yeah. And so like I don't, as much as I love making wide sweeping statements, I think there's not a right or wrong answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think as long as you are learning and sort of reacting to the work you create, so that your new work is informed by your old work, and there's some sort of like feedback loop that you're sort of acknowledging. You're not just head down just producing work. I think either one of those options is valid.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that's one of the reasons that I'm also sort of in parallel to all this, trying to figure out what my photography looks like. And I think with regard to the photography, part of the process that I am choosing to go through is creating small portfolios in the style of some of my photographic heroes. And that could be a single image, or it could be multiple images, to see what comes out on the other side, because it's not just going to look like them. I'm never going to create an Irving Penn photo. I'm never going to create a Gregory Crewdson photo. But if I can pull some of that stuff, some of their compositional strengths or some of the aesthetic strengths into my filter and then see what comes out the other side. That's what I think would be, I think that would be an interesting experiment.
Yeah. And I think that what happens is then, say you take a bunch of portraits very similar to Irving Penn,
Mm-hmm.
but then you take, I don't know, you also are playing with something work that's more like Robert Frank.
Right.
And then there's an interesting middle where it's like a part of Penn, part of Frank. Then you maybe throw in, like, I don't know, pick someone in Crutzen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then you start layering things, and that's where new interesting work is born out of.
Let me ask you this: do you think, and this might be, there might not be an answer for this, but do you think that it is the odds of creating interesting work are better with some sort of backstory of inspiration, or going at a completely new direction without the net of those who came before you? I mean, and it's a strange question because I don't know that we can find anything that hasn't been done in some way before.
Personally, I think that it is very hard to produce work from the jump that is entirely yours and different than anything that's come before you.
Right.
Because that is one of those intellectual, like, you have to shoot so far outside of the norm and land to be able to do that in one shot.
Mm-hmm.
That I think the more sustainable option is to just keep on iterating on your work, and that taking little small bets or small, like, experiments, and then looking at it and go, is this what I want to be doing? Is there something in here? Is there an idea inside this frame that I like, that I could take and maybe expand on, maybe do something different, like build upon that?
Right.
I would probably argue that most groundbreaking work, it was built by that process. Then all of a sudden someone came out with this just crazy work, and, you know, they are who they are from the jump.
Right.
You know, I'd imagine if you looked at Crutzen's work,
mm-hmm.
there is probably plenty of images from Crutzen before he was Crutzen. Or you even see it, like, with the Dan Winters book, his big book that you love.
Oh, Road to Seeing. Yeah.
Road to Seeing.
Yeah.
You look at that first half of that book, you see Dan Winters become Dan Winters through those pages.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to be clear, that's one of the big draws for me to that book is it's not written in hindsight. It's not a monograph. It's not a, here, let's celebrate, my body of work. It's, here's how I got there. Here's the mm-hmm. story of me becoming me in terms of who you know me to be now, like photographically anyway.
Yeah. I think that back to that initial quote of, like, don't judge your beginning by someone else's middle, is that we want from the beginning to produce work that you only earn in the middle.
Right. What's wrong with that?
At the start. Yeah.
I don't want to earn it, John. I just want to be able to make it.
Everyone who picks up the camera, like, does vlogs, wants to be Casey Neistat from this jump.
Right. Yeah. And if you go back and look, Casey wasn't Casey at the jump. Casey had to become Casey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things where you have to decide if you want to create that work, and then you have to earn that work. And I think, it's one of those things where, like, talking about that project on Ambler, if I wanted this body of work to be what I imagined it could be, I have to earn that work.
Mm-hmm.
And that means going through the learning process. It means all those roles where you're like, that didn't turn out. That's boring.
Right,
That's,
right.
Like.
Were you this self-aware about your work 20 years ago? Or does even,
No.
do you even have to earn the awareness to realize
Yes.
that you have to earn the work.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's why I stopped painting back in the day, right?
Oh, yeah.
I'm never going to be this. Well, no, you're not, because you haven't earned it. No.
Yeah.
You don't get to just show up.
I had a conversation over a pizza and beer with a friend yesterday where I talked about like some of the more personal decisions in my life. In hindsight, I could see how they played out,
Mm-hmm.
but I could never go back and judge myself X number of years ago for making that decision.
Right.
When I didn't know what I know now to realize that there was a different decision available to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's only through going through that, making that decision and going through the life that has transpired since that decision that I understand that decision.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there is something to the idea that everything, maybe not everything, but everything worthwhile anyway, has to be earned.
Oh, yeah. And that's what makes it worthwhile.
Right. The earning. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't appreciate the easy. You don't appreciate the things that are just given to you. You appreciate the things you have to work your ass off for.
Right.
You don't you just see the Beatles becoming the largest band in the world. You don't see them playing 3 shows a night, 4 shows a night every night. You don't see that type of work. The same with we've talked about Magnum's contact sheets so much.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see what came before or came after those images that we've all seen.
Right. There is this notion of patience, which is sometimes difficult because you want to arrive. You want to get to the good work. You want to get to the stuff that's interesting. You want to get to the stuff. You want to be able to make the stuff that you yourself want to look at. Right.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to work through those crap projects to get to the good ones.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I would argue that those crap projects have value buried in them.
But you don't see that when you're young. You don't see that when you're sort of impetuous and wanting to be something or someone. You don't see the value in the failures and the mistakes. You just see them as failures and mistakes.
That's something you learn through experience. But if you focus and look at everything you create from the standpoint of like, you made a decision to create that.
Mm-hmm.
And in that decision, there's some sort of truth. There's some sort of interesting thing. And it's sort of, I think, that famous Philip Glass quote where they talk about where creative people, like, what they have great taste, but they don't have the talent to execute that taste.
Hmm.
I'm pulling it up. Let's see. Nobody tells this to people who are beginners. I wish someone told me. All of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste. But there's this gap. For the first couple of years, you make stuff. It's just not that good. You're trying to be good. It has potential, but it's not. But your taste, the thing that got you in the game, is still killer. And your taste is why your work disappoints you. A lot of people never get past this phase. They quit. Most people I know who do interesting creative work went through years of this. We know our work doesn't have this special thing that we want it to have. We all go through this. And it's you that just starting out, or you're still in this phase. You got to know it's normal. And the most important thing you do is a lot of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week you finish one story. It's only by going through the volume of work that you will close that gap, and your work will be good as your ambition. It took longer to figure out how to do this than anyone I've ever met. It's going to take a while. It's normal to take a while. You just got to fight your way through this. That was from Ira Glass.
That's really cool. Ira Glass, not Philip Glass.
Yeah. Wrong glass.
Wrong glass. I was like, wait a minute.
No. And so, like, round this all the way back, I think that sums up your Carson-esque graphic design in a nutshell. You have the taste, you have the ambition. There's a gap.
Right. And that gap may never be filled. And what I need to do, and I think what all of us need to do, is be okay with that gap never being filled and not getting to that person, whoever you're holding up as your ideal or as your sort of pinnacle of the kind of work that you want to create. Because if you get there, you'll get to them, you won't get to you. And I think that's the hard part in all of this is not really knowing, because we all want to know, right? We want to know who we are, what the work is that we're going to create. And we have to be okay with arriving there and going, wow, this is interesting. And it not being that person that we, sort of held up as the gold standard.
Mm-hmm. Because what happens is when we start closing that gap, the target changes to something that's more like the work we can create than the hero we want to imitate.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I know that intellectually. But every time every time I look at, maybe not every time, but often when I look at my own work, whether it's something I've written, something I've painted, something I've photographed, I just see where it missed the mark, and that overshadows any mark that it may have hit.
Maybe if you looked at that work and go, I know it's bad. I'm just gonna.
Well, it's not bad. I mean, come on, man, give me some credit. It's not. I'm not saying it's all bad.
Well, you never share it, so I don't
know. Fair point.
But like, whatever, like you look at it and you go, I'm gonna ignore the things that I don't like about this. And I go, can I find one element that I like? Can I find one thing that I'm like, okay, that I did I did a good job with this little piece.
Right. The drop shadows look amazing.
King of drop shadows over here.
Yeah. I had it's funny, I had a professor, Herb, I've talked about him before, but he was acutely aware of the crutches that his students would fall back on, right, in their work. And he would routinely, when you would bring in a piece for critique, he would routinely go, what do you like about this? What element of this do you think works the best? And you would tell him, and he'd go, okay, take that out and go redo it.
Yeah.
Take out that thing that you keep, because you'll find that thing that you like appears quite often. It becomes either consciously or subconsciously the crutch that you lean on in your work. So his thing was, I'm going to kick this crutch out from under you and see if you can still stand up.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're going to fall to the ground, but sometimes you're going to wobble, and then sometimes you're going to stand tall.
Yeah. No, to be honest, that's a brilliant way to deal with that.
I always hated him for it, though.
Of course.
It was a love-hate. Like, I know you're right, but damn it, I spent so long on this, and now you want me to go redo it because I used this thing again, right?
Yeah. No, I could be like, I could totally see that being like, God damn it.
Yeah.
That's
But you see that over and over. I mean, you see that in Instagram. You see similar characteristics or features of people's work appear over and over and over again in that work. And to the point you made earlier about being sort of creatively off balance, I think that's where I'm trying to get is to be able to be okay with feeling creatively off balance, and to be okay with the work that comes out of it, even if it doesn't hit this arbitrary mark that I thought that it should hit when I started making it, whatever it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think we get something out of being off balance and landing something. And I think that feels a lot better than, doing something you can do.
Right. Well, and it sounds like that's one of the factors that led you to sort of put down the pinhole work, at least for now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know I can make this interesting. I know that I can create this and it'll land. I'm not so sure about this other stuff over here, so this is where I need to be for a while.
Yeah, no, it became one of those things where it's like I could keep on exploring this idea, or let me play with something. In an essence, almost try to produce work that I'm really resonating with right now,
mm-hmm.
and see if I could do it myself in this sort of framework of this project.
Right. See what comes out the other side. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you happy with where it's at right now, or are you at least happy enough to continue and see where it goes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm happy enough with that. The value of the project is still very much there.
Mm-hmm.
And the interest in the project is very much there. And it's encouraging that my execution and what I want to produce is getting closer to what I want. But I also created a project that is purposefully extremely long and sort of, in essence, arduous, because I wanted something that I could continually butt my head against and sort of play with and sort of work on. And that if it needed to, it could slip in the background for times. It could pop back up to the but it's always there, like slow burning, because I know that the lessons that and the things I figure out in this project, I'll be able to apply elsewhere.
Right. So you don't see this as necessarily having an arrival. There's no situation where you go, okay, I'm done with this. It just continues in the background, informing other things along the way.
As of right now, that statement's correct.
Yeah.
But I also understand, like, I could also totally see getting to the point where I'm like, okay, it's done.
Right. I've done. I've gotten all I can get, or I've delivered all I can out of this.
Yeah. Or I move, or like fill in the blank. Life changes. There's so many different factors that could change the outcome of this project.
Mm-hmm.
But I think giving myself something like that, where it's like, this is gonna be a project where I know even though I've hit my head against the wall already with this, that I will hit my head against the wall again at some point. It just becomes something I'll continually wrestle with.
Right.
And I like that possibility.
Did you know that if you subscribe to Jeffrey Sidoris Everything in your favorite podcast app, you'll get every in-between, every iteration, every process driven, as well as special one-off conversations all in one feed? It's true. Connect with me on Instagram and Twitter at Jeffrey Sidoris. That's JEFFERYSADDORIS, or on my website at jeffreysidoris.com. You can email me at talkback@jeffreysidoris.com. If you have ideas for the show or just want to share what you're up to, drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you. You can find John on Instagram at John Wilkening. That's JONWILKENING, or by visiting his website at johnwilkening.com. And as always, thank you very much for listening. I appreciate your time, and I'll talk to you on the next one.